You're listening to KRUULP 100.1 FM, the voice of Fairfield, Iowa, and beyond, the Midwest's only solar-powered radio station. My name is Dennis Raimondi. My show is Speaking Freely, and my guest today, and I'm excited about this one, is Sal Bonavita. He is an entrepreneur. He is the former owner of Pete's Coffee, which I'm sure pretty much everybody has heard about. He has been instrumental in bringing quality coffee to the United States. He's still very active and living in the San Francisco area. And I should mention I'm doing a special series on coffee and coffee culture worldwide, and that'll be on this station. And then I'll spin it off into a separate blog podcast on coffee and coffee culture. So obviously it's something I have a passion for. Sal, thank you so very much for taking the time to come on with me today.
It's a pleasure, Dennis.
So Sal, I read about you, and I read about your career, and you're getting involved in coffee imports back in the 70s. You were founder and CEO of Coffee Imports International. You're Italian American, I assume, as am I. Was there a lot of coffee? Was there tea? Were these products part of your upbringing? What got you interested, and what got you into this business?
It's an interesting story to me, Dennis, because when I got out of college, I came to San Francisco, but on my way, I had a very close friend that had a coffee business in Colorado, and we were very tight, and when one of us found something that was interesting, right, we were going to call the other one. So anyway, he called me up and he said he's got this new business that he just bought, where you sell the coffee to offices and you give them a machine. Now, this is a time when coffee was generally made only in percolators.
Right.
I mean, even big percolators for commercial stores. So I went out and made a presentation with him, and it was like magic. People hadn't seen a pour over before,
right,
and you have a little pouch.
So you were doing pour over back in the 70s. What kind of machine were you using? What type of device for the pour over?
Well, we were using some of the commercial ones.
Mm-hmm.
So that was just the beginning of it. So then I came out to California in 1964, and I started a company, actually not until, I guess it was 1967, 68, called Perky Coffee Company, that went around and put coffee machines and gave you a complete package of coffee pouches, the cream, the sugar, the sticks, and all of that. Mm-hmm. It was a tax-deductible item, and it was very successful, and I wound up selling that company. And after I sold that company, some friends of mine who knew I was in the coffee business were working for Macy's, and Ed Finkelstein, who was the president of Macy's at that time, had an idea of having these boutique shops in the department store. This is brand new. Before that, all electrics were together, all mm-hmm. ceramics were together, and there was no shop. So they were trying to get coffee, and as you probably know by now, after oil, coffee is the largest traded commodity in the world.
Wow.
So in those days, when you call up and try to buy coffee, even though Macy's thought they were big enough, call up a coffee roaster and say you want to buy coffee, they want to talk to you about how many tons do you want. Right. So anyway, they couldn't get that piece put together. And several times, a friend of mine who was selling to Macy's was getting pressure from the vice president to see if they could contact me or somebody else that had access to coffee. And I said no several times, and finally, when I thought about it, I said, okay, well, I'll give it a try. If you will, one store is not worth it for me to do. So if you give me, I want to start in 2 stores. One, a new store in San Francisco that you're going to try this concept out in, and then the Stanford Shopping Center store. And they said to me, look, Sal, if it works, we'll take you to Chicago and introduce you to the entire chain of Macy's and Federated stores, etc. So we gave it a try. We started out in San Francisco in this boutique coffee shop. They took all the coffee accessories, cups, coffee makers that they had, even the mostly percolators at the time. And it was a success. And I kept on getting questions from the buyers like, hey, Sal, where do I get an espresso machine? I said, oh, there's a guy named Joe Bacigalupi down in Florida. He sells espresso machines. And, it was like that.
Right.
And I went to the people at that time, Continental Coffee Company and MJB, who were suppliers to me of coffee when I had that Perky Coffee Company. And I went to Continental Coffee Company, and naturally by this time I knew the president and the buyer of coffee for them. They're a large company and were at that time too. And I asked them to finance the equipment that I would need to set up these shops.
Well, Sal, let me ask you a question. What year was this? And at that time, were there many people looking for like espresso machines?
No. This was, we're talking Coffee Imports was about 1970, 1971.
So if you wanted an espresso machine, you probably moved here from Italy or something. There weren't many around then, I would think. Yeah,
if you wanted an espresso machine, you'd have to go down to, in San Francisco, for example, you'd have to go to North Beach where the Italian community was. And in those places, you could find an espresso maker and things like that, but it wasn't mass marketed in any way.
So go ahead. So then, where you left off.
So we gave it a try in Macy's cellar, which was a major success in terms of retail concepts. And I was getting all these questions about where do I get this cups, or where do I get a plunger, and what coffee maker should I get? So I decided to go to Italy and find the vendors of those types of products, and then I would be able to have a more complete everything you need for a coffee shop kind of thing. Espresso machines, drip, the French press, and I was, and then it turned out that I was a major agent or representative for some of these Italian companies. So I had the exclusive in the United States, and I just kept, that part just kept building up. Coffee Imports kept on upping the ante of what the store needed to carry. So it did so well, and Macy's took me to Chicago where they had the big houseware shows and presented this shop concept and how successful it was, that everything relating to coffee and tea was selling like double what it was when it was standalone on the aisles. So at that time, before you know it, we had all these department stores that wanted to put this shop in, and the buyer. I always like this story though, but the buyer from Macy's wanted me to come to Macy's and their Herald Square store and put in a shop there, and I just. So I kept on telling him, I said, no, I don't want to come to New York. I mean, you got unions just to get the coffee up. I'd have to pay some. I went through that whole story. So Now, he's from New York, naturally, so he doesn't hear my New York accent.
Right.
So he said, no, we'll take care of you. I said, well, listen, you could do me one favor. You can. I know you were in Europe, and you were one of the buyers for Macy's and Federated, and give me a contact. So he gave me a name of a woman that was the head buyer for Macy's and Federated in Italy for shoes and everything else. But she would be the one, he said. And I said, great. So as I mentioned, I was going to go to Italy to the trade show, which I did go to, and I couldn't get the deal. I was being given a retail prices for some of these coffee espresso machines. So I called up this woman, Adriana Monini, and she had retired from Macy's. Her husband was a lawyer, and she definitely didn't need it. But she was a merchant, and when I spoke to her and told her about this concept, this new concept that specialty coffee would be the next wave of retail business,
right.
She was a little interested, and she said, the next time you come to Florence, give me a call and we'll talk about it. But she said, I'm not interested now, I'm retired and all of that. So the next day I got on a train and went up to Florence and called her up. We got together, became good friends. She got excited about this concept. So she became my agent, and I ultimately had a little office in Florence through her. And that was my introduction into Italy. And then if I'd had an idea about a coffee maker at that time, which I did, I wanted to, for example, there wasn't a stovetop espresso machine. So the idea of being able to make a machine that you could put on your stove that would make espresso coffee, and then also have a feature of making foam for cappuccinos and lattes and stuff like that. So over the period that I owned Coffee Imports, there was always a new item. You had to come up with almost 6 new items a year once you start getting into department stores, and they want to be different from everybody else. So anyway, that part was moving along very nicely, and I got Continental Coffee to finance all of these department stores because I said to them, look, this is the new trend in coffee, and you guys, if you were to do a survey or a pilot, it would probably cost you several $100,000. All I'm asking you is to do what you did for me when I had Perky and finance the equipment that I need to sell your coffee.
Now, Sal, let me ask you, was the interest greatest in San Francisco, Chicago, New York? Was it mostly a West Coast thing at this point, or was it, or were all the major cities picking up on this?
Well, when it started in San Francisco. I mean, that's where the interest was, and it was easy to develop. You know, when I spoke to my friends back in New York about a coffee shop, we got 100 coffee shops around. You know, I mean, it was different. New York, the East Coast was much later. The West Coast, Seattle had some coffee shops going and stuff. But so Continental agreed to finance the equipment, and that really gave me the ability to put it in major department stores all over the country.
So this, as I understand it, Sal, this would have been the beginning of the what they call the second wave in coffee, where the quality specialty coffee starts coming in.
Well, yeah, that if you wanted to phrase it that way, yes, that was that's when it began, back in 1970.
Right, and then
now, Alfred.
I was going to say Alfred Pete comes next, probably.
Yeah. So in 1955, he arrived in San Francisco.
Now this is Alfred Pete, who was Pete's Coffee is named after, for our listeners that don't know, and he came into the United States from Holland. Is that right?
No, in 1950, he was from Holland,
Right.
but in 1950, but he went to New Zealand,
Okay.
and he was and while he was in New Zealand, he got bored with New Zealand. He thought it was there wasn't anything happening there, so he wanted to come to the United States, which is interesting, right? Because if he would have came from Holland, he would have went to New York.
Right.
But being he was in New Zealand, he came to San Francisco.
Interesting. Yeah.
So anyway, that was 1955, and then he decided to open up his own coffee shop. He worked, and that was the first store was in Berkeley. So now we're talking 1966, 1965, like that.
Right.
And so Coffee Imports is doing great. Couldn't, just had to get the products there. And it turned out that what I wound up doing is getting Continental Coffee, which had about 4 roasting plants all over covering the United States. And now they were talking tons too, but I had a relationship with them, and life is so funny. But so the president decided that he liked the idea of the coffee shop concept, and maybe I was right. And yes, they wouldn't have to spend the money to prove that point when they could lend me the money and I could do all the hard work about the heavy lifting about it. But so the CEO and owner of the Cohen family owned Continental Coffee Company, and the president wanted to meet me, and he was at some resort in San Diego and trying to lose weight and stuff like that. And I went down to see him, and he liked the idea very much. And then when I went back to New York to see the president, he said, "Well, listen, how am I going to give you specialty coffee?" He said, and then he said, "We have one thing, is that we sell a lot of coffee to the Navy, and we have them in these 25-pound containers." So I said, "Perfect, because all of your blends have Colombia in it and Guatemala and et cetera. So let's split that up. Let's take the individual coffee, roast it separate, and put it in the 25-pound cans, and that's how I'll sell it." So ultimately, we got it together. We got the cans. We got, I gave them the coffees that I wanted from the list of the coffees that they were buying. And that's how the product got started.
Wow.
That was the first time, like, in Florida or any of the other department stores all over the country, in Texas and stuff like that. This is the first time they saw specialty coffee, really.
That's a great. For those just tuning in, we're talking to Sal Bonavita, former owner of Pete's Coffee, entrepreneur, and somebody who really introduced specialty coffee to the United States. We have about 10 minutes left, which is a long time in radio, but I want to hear about your connection with Alfred Pete, who mentored you and was the original founder of Pete's Coffee.
So after a while, when I was selling coffee, I get a price increase. And okay, what's your choice? You either pay it or not. And then I noticed that there was some pellets in the some of the coffee that I was getting, and it didn't taste the same as it did, let's say, 2 months ago.
Right.
So I called up to find out, what are these pellets? Oh, he said, when you roast coffee, you have this residue of the coffee, and we take that, the stuff that normally burns off, and we put it into pellets, and then put it back in when we grind up the coffee. No, I didn't like that idea at all.
Right.
It was the
Right.
chaff of the coffee beans.
Right.
So I was kind of thinking about it, like, I don't have any control really over the coffee. And one day I was going through my sales records of all these stores that I had, and there was this one store over in Berkeley that was selling more espresso makers than major department stores.
Mm-hmm.
So I said to my sales manager, Mark Freeman, "Hey, Mark, next time you make a call on this place over in Berkeley, take me with you. I want to meet the man." So he did. I met Alfred. I tasted the coffee. And it was dark roasted coffee, and it was much darker than the coffee I was selling. And I was just thinking about, well, I don't know if I want to do that dark coffee. But he had but by now he had a roasting plant in Emeryville. So I was interested in roasting and controlling my own coffee. So I went to see Alfred a couple of times, and one time, I found out from our conversations that he wasn't married, had no children, and so I said, "Listen, Alfred, if you ever think about selling your company, please call me." He said, "Why, you think you can buy this company?" I said, "Well, I'd be interested in it, Alfred. We could talk about it." So that went on for probably 7-8 months. And next time I went to see Alfred, and about 7 or 8 months later, he said, "I'm interested in selling my company." He said, "But we'll have to taste coffee and tea to see if you're even capable of running this company." So for 2 weeks, I was tasting coffee and tea with him. And up until that point, I was in the coffee business for years by then, but I didn't have this piece. What was the difference? What made this coffee better than that? What was the taste profile? All of that. I mean, I don't want to make it too technical in that way, but now I was dealing with a guy that was a fanatic, that it had to be perfect. So as long as you do it perfect, you'll be okay. Now, his issue was that most people didn't even know what good coffee really was. They only had the coffee that they were being served, to him was poopy coffee. I mean, it was nothing. American coffee.
Maxwell House.
Yeah, that whole story. So for several weeks, we tasted coffee and tea, and he was very, he was a drill sergeant kind of guy. And so I tasted coffee and tea with him, not knowing, I was out of my depth now. Which Guatemala do you like better? Which one do you think is better? Of all those coffees you tasted, which one did you like the most? I mean, he knew I couldn't differentiate between this year's Sumatra and last year's Sumatra, which ultimately we did do. But at that point, it was just seeing if I had a palate.
Wow.
So then we decided, okay, let's make a deal. So he got together with his attorneys, which was a major firm in San Francisco, and we sat down, and he'd have about 4 attorneys, and I'd have one, and we were working out the details of what's the best way for him to get paid, and how are we going to work out all the details. So this is going on for about a month. So one day I said to Alfred, "Alfred, we are spending over $1,000 an hour to talk about stuff that you and I can resolve ourselves. why don't we just take a weekend, go up to Napa, hang out together, and figure this out, and save all that money. Well, he loved it.
Uh-huh.
You know, that Dutch frugal.
Right.
They're talking about it. So that's what we did. We went up to Napa for the weekend and worked it all out. He thought I would be capable of running the business, being I already had a company that, I mean, I wasn't a guy coming off the street, you know, that I already had a company.
Right.
And,
It sounded like he took great pride in what he did, and he wanted to make sure if he was selling this, it wasn't just a financial proposition, and he wanted to make sure that company was kept and the quality maintained. Is that right?
Yes, I mean, that was it. That was the whole issue, because in terms of the negotiation, just to the last little piece of it, when the deal was finally made, I said to him, well, Alfred, you pick the price and I'll pick the terms.
Uh-huh.
And he was okay. That was perfect for him, because he could put in the piece that he didn't want me to. If I would pay him all cash, it'd be one thing. But if he had to finance it, which he did, then he wanted to put some provisions in that I couldn't sell it to the department stores or any wholesale accounts until he was paid off.
Wow. But, you know, Sal, it's a great story. I have to say, we only have about 3 minutes left. So you have to promise me we're going to do a part 2 to this interview, because I feel we got to that point of Pete's and I want to go past that. And this half hour has gone way too quickly. So I want to make sure we do a part 2 to this at some point in the near future. Does that sound reasonable?
Yeah, it's great. I mean, it's I think I'll get to maybe tell you things about Alfred Pete that most folks never knew about.
Right.
So,
no, this is great information, and specialty coffee is exploding. I've been traveling around the United States and even in Scandinavia, and it's going great guns. And really, you and Pete, Alfred Pete, were the guys who really, I mean, certainly in the United States, opened up this arena for everything that's happened for Pete's and Starbucks and Stumptown and Lacombe and Intelligentsia and everything else that's come since then. It must be very, you must take great pride in that, and it must be very fulfilling, I would think, for you to see how something you were involved in introducing really exploded and is growing like crazy right now in America.
But, you know, Dennis, to me, I just feel I was at the right place at the right time.
Right.
I mean, life just pushed me through that, and you know, having a mentor like Alfred just changed the whole dynamics.
Right. What
So,
a great, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I know I was going to say.
I was just saying.
Yeah. You go.
I was just going to say that. You know, I look forward to our next.
Absolutely,
podcast.
And I wouldn't be surprised if there's a part 3. You have a great story to tell. For those listening in, you're listening to KRUU LP 100.1 FM. Our guest today has been Sal Bonavita, a former owner of Pete's Coffee, and it will be a part of a series I'm doing here, and also a separate blog podcast I'm going to be doing, or I'm in the midst of putting together on coffee and coffee culture worldwide. And you've been listening to a real pioneer, entrepreneur, and visionary in the area of coffee and coffee culture worldwide. Sal, thank you so very much for taking the time to come on today.
My pleasure, Dennis.
And I'm also going to thank Mark Freeman for making the introduction. Until next time, all the best.
Okay.